We're going to give the floor to Abigail Dean. She is head of sustainability at Nuveen Real Estate. Really glad to have her with us. Abigail, are you online?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Hey, hello. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you.
That's great. Well, it's a privilege to have you with us. I'm really looking forward to your keynote about, well, net zero carbon and impact on real estate. Do you have a presentation with you?
I do, yeah.
You can share that if you like.
Yeah, I will.
And then we can give it a go.
Well, sorry about the technical problems, everyone, and thanks very much for having me. I'm going to talk through the future of net carbon for real estate investment and also impact investing. So I'll just give you a little bit of background, first of all, about who we are at Nuveen. So Nuveen Real Estate is one of the world's largest real estate asset managers, with over $130 billion of real estate assets under management spread across the US, Asia Pacific, and Europe. And you can see along the bottom of this slide that breakdown. So about 2/3 of our investments is in the US, and then we've got the rest split between Europe and Asia Pacific. We have 25 offices and over 600 people. And what that means for us is that we have to consider a range of different local market drivers and regulatory pressures when it comes to looking in particular at things like the transition to the low carbon economy, which is playing out differently in the different regions in which we invest, with a very clear political push in Europe, and also a lot of very engaged investors in Europe. A quite rapidly evolving situation in the US, where we see the emergence of a lot of local regulations and quite strong action at that state level. And now with the Biden administration coming in, that strong action starting to come from the government as well. So expecting to see a real acceleration of the drive towards the low carbon economy in the US as well, and then a range of different positions across Asia Pacific. But the majority of countries in which we invest in Asia Pacific have now set goals to achieve net zero carbon, either by 2050 or 2060. So that regulatory environment starting to even out across the globe, and various locations where there's a real push to get there more quickly. My role within Nuveen Real Estate is as the head of strategic insights. So I oversee our sustainability team and also our research, pop tech and innovations group. So all of the parts of the business that are looking at those long-term mega trends that are going to have an impact on real estate value now and into the future. And we look at all of these areas together to understand what those long-term trends are going to be, that will have an impact on real estate value. So real estate is clearly subject to market cycles, and we do a lot of work to understand how they might play out. But what we want to do is be looking through those market cycles and understand those fundamental dynamics that are going to have a long-term impact on real estate, which helps us to look to the future and understand what real estate is going to be valid in the future, what people are going to want from their real estate in the future, and where it's best for that to be located. And from a sustainability perspective, absolutely at the core of that is ensuring that our buildings are fit for the low carbon future, and that they're able to achieve net zero carbon. So we've set a range of different sustainability goals across the whole real estate business. The first of those, which actually applied to the whole of Nuveen, was to achieve a full climate risk integration into our investment decision making, and that was by the end of last year. So what that entailed was ensuring that with every investment decision that is made, we have the processes in place, and the people making those decisions have been sufficiently trained that they understand the implications of climate risk for investment value, and they can start to think about how that might need to impact on some of their investment decisions. For real estate, that's about understanding what physical impacts of climate change might do to the value of real estate in different locations, and also understanding what the level of investment that's needed to get a building to net zero carbon might be, and what a reasonable time frame in that market might be for it to achieve that. We also have a target to reduce the energy intensity of our real estate portfolio by 30% by 2025. We set that back in 2015 and are well on track to achieve it. Initially, we were aiming to achieve that goal by 2030, but we've now brought that forward to 2025 as we've been making good progress against it. And that's become the first milestone in our longer term goal, which is to be a net zero carbon portfolio by 2040. So that means that all of our real estate investments by 2040 will be in net zero carbon buildings, or buildings that we're acquiring at or around that date will be swiftly transitioned to be net zero carbon. And why is that significant for real estate? Well, real estate is responsible for about 40% of global carbon emissions, and that's through a combination of the construction of real estate and the operation of real estate. So if we are to achieve that Paris Accord goal of limiting global warming, ideally to no more than 1.5 degrees, then we will need to see a complete change in the real estate sector over the coming decades. And all buildings are going to need to become net zero carbon. The World Green Building Council has said that all newly constructed buildings should be net zero carbon from 2030 onwards, so that's just around the corner, and all buildings must be net zero carbon by 2050. For us, we've decided to try and get there a little bit ahead of that 2050 goal. That's because we are a leader in responsible investing, and we've got a good track record of reducing our carbon emissions already across our portfolio, so we feel we've got the knowledge and the skill set and the investment style in order to get there sooner. We also think it protects the value of our real estate more effectively. If all buildings must be net zero by 2050, it seems clear to us that buildings that are not net zero carbon are going to start to lose their value, particularly as we get beyond 2040 towards that 2050 date. So in order to best protect the value of our investments, we think it's prudent to aim for all of our real estate to be net zero carbon by 2040 at the latest. And this is a little bit more detail on what that looks like for us. As I said, back in 2015, we initially set our goal of a 30% reduction by 2030. Also, just not long after that, we signed up to the Better Buildings Partnership commitment on climate change, which meant that we had a commitment to publish a net zero carbon pathway by the end of 2020, which is what I'm presenting to you now. Then by 2025, we want to develop net zero carbon business plans for all of our buildings. We want to have gathered at least 50% of the consumption data for our tenants, because tenant energy data does form part of this goal. And we also want to have assessed the net zero carbon potential for our debt portfolio. And by that date, we'll have achieved our 30% energy reduction target. By 2030, we want to have reduced that energy intensity by 50% on average across our portfolio. We anticipate by this date that all buildings in Europe will be meeting local industry standards for what the path to net zero carbon looks like. The mass removal of fuels within our buildings will be well underway. So that means transitioning away from, in particular, gas-fired boilers and diesel, moving towards electric heat, ground source, air source heat pumps. And we'll also be most of our energy will be procured from renewable sources at that point, specifically through power purchase agreements. And then by 2040, we'll have expanded all of that out globally. So all of our buildings will be meeting local standards for net zero carbon. Significant reductions will have taken place in the embodied carbon associated with any development and refurbishment activity that we undertake. And for the small amount of carbon that's left at that stage, which we anticipate will be largely associated with development or refurbishment activity, we'll procure carbon offsets. But it's important to us that that plays a relatively modest part in this goal. So what does our carbon footprint look like at the moment? Well, just under half of it comes from our standing assets, our portfolio of buildings, and about 2/3 of that is from the tenant carbon emissions within those buildings. So a relatively small amount is within the landlord control, but our goal does encompass everything. So we'll be engaging with tenants, gathering their data, working with them to improve buildings, and taking opportunities in between leases to make the necessary upgrades to buildings. So having a strong programme of engagement with tenants is absolutely crucial. About a quarter of the carbon emissions are within our debt portfolio, so starting to introduce green loans and bring net zero carbon commitments into our loans, probably more towards the back end of this decade, will be really important. And then just over a quarter is from development activity. That is, even though we are not, development activity does not form the majority of our investment activity. We are largely investing in already built assets and trading in those. We do a modest amount of development, but development is incredibly carbon intensive, particularly ground up development. So taking action to reduce the embodied carbon in development through a range of methods, whether that be using low carbon alternatives of materials such as steel and concrete, introducing more timber into our developments, which is lower carbon, reducing waste is very important, and wherever possible, redeveloping buildings rather than ground up development. And then finally, a very small portion comes from our corporate activity, and that's business travel and our own office occupation. We're building on a platform of success in this area, and it's one of the reasons why we felt very confident to set this goal. This is showing progress against that 30% reduction target that we set back in 2015. If we were going to achieve it by 2030, we'd need to be following that dotted blue line. But as you can see, we're actually more closely following the dotted orange line, which gets us to that goal by 2025. We're doing even better at the moment, but that's largely because a number of our buildings, as you would expect, were not fully occupied or fully operational during 2020 and the early part of 2021 because of the various different COVID lockdowns. So we would expect to see an uptick in energy consumption as all of our buildings get back to normal operation, hopefully over the course of the next month and year. But we'd still expect to be tracking along that dotted orange line and getting to our goal by 2025. And this goal covers all of the different real estate sectors that we invest in, although we have more complete data coverage for particular office buildings and some retail and multifamily buildings, and more modest data coverage for our industrial portfolio. And it excludes debt, but as I say, debt is going to be part of our longer term 2040 goal. So what is a net zero carbon building? Well, I think what's important to note is that it does vary from country to country. So a net zero carbon building by definition is one where all of the energy needs are met by on-site or off-site renewable energy. There are no fossil fuels but they're burnt on site. However, the level of energy efficiency that the building needs to get to will vary from country to country. So it's not acceptable for a building just to continue to use large amounts of energy and just get all of that from renewable sources. A building does need to be highly energy efficient, and what that level of energy efficiency will be will vary according to the availability of renewable energy in different countries, and will be defined by either different governments in setting their net zero carbon transition plans, or by international bodies such as the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor or the World Green Building Council, who are both doing work to set out what those pathways to net zero carbon look like for different real estate assets across the world. So we do expect that there are buildings in countries with plentiful renewable energy, such as Sweden, for example, will be able to use more energy than buildings in countries where there is more constrained supply of renewable energy, such as at the moment Germany and the Netherlands. But as time moves on and more renewable energy is made available, that allowance of energy to be used might become slightly more generous. It's also important to reduce embodied carbon in any development or refurbishment activity as far as possible in order for a building to meet that net zero carbon definition, and any carbon that's left in that development phase to be offset. And what that means is that we follow this energy hierarchy, which is really important. So first and foremost, reducing energy demand. That's ensuring that a building isn't using energy unnecessarily when it doesn't need to, that it's not leaving heating and cooling systems on throughout the night, which sadly still happens all too often, that lights aren't left on when they don't need to be. Once you've dealt with that, the next thing is to introduce efficiency measures such as efficient lighting, efficient heating and cooling, and also that's where the replacement of on-site heating with low carbon alternatives comes into play. The introduction of on-site renewable energy wherever possible, and then off-site renewable energy where on-site renewables can't meet all of the energy demand. And then finally, you get to that offset position. So that's very broadly the pathway that Nuveen will be following in order to achieve its net zero carbon goal by 2040. And the reason that we've put this into place is because we, as well as wanting to do the right thing, we genuinely can see that there is going to be a value depreciation associated with buildings that are not able to achieve net zero carbon. We see regulatory pressure coming in this area all across the globe, and particularly accelerating quite quickly in Europe. We can see institutional investors starting to set their own net zero carbon goals, and will only want to invest in real estate that is able to help them get to that goal. And we see increasing numbers of occupiers starting to set their own net zero carbon commitments. So occupying buildings that are net zero carbon will form an important part of them achieving that. So real estate that is able to be net zero carbon is going to be much more future-proofed and able to hold its value into the future. I now want to talk a little bit about impact investing and how the push towards net zero carbon plays into that, and also what that means for the more social side of ESG. So far I've been talking mainly about the environmental side. So it's now pretty much standard that the vast majority of real estate investments do include some form of ESG integration, and you can see that on the left-hand side here. So mainstream investment will, as standard, incorporate an element of ESG integration or screening as a way of enhancing return and managing risk. So for real estate, that would typically involve, at the point of acquisition, understanding what the particular risks and opportunities of a building might be, how much money you might have to invest in it to ensure that it can meet local standards, additional return that can be achieved by putting renewable energy in place at a building, and understanding that the risks associated with climate change. So that's just good standard, makes sense, and will help to protect the value, and those decisions are made in the context of enhancing return. As you move over towards the right-hand side of this diagram, you can see impact investing in the middle there. And that is where, rather than just looking at environmental and social factors to boost the overall return, you elevate those factors to be investment objectives alongside achieving a return. So there's still a fundamental return criteria that an investment has to make, but there's also an environmental objective that has to be achieved, and or a social objective that has to be achieved. So it's about treating all of these things equally, and not about just looking at the environmental and social elements in regard to how they can help to boost the overall value of an investment. What's also important for impact investing is that there is clear additionality. So it's no good to make an impact investment if the social or environmental impact that you're having would have happened naturally through other investment activity. It needs to have clear additionality that the investment that you have made has created that impact. So a good example there might be if investing in affordable housing, if the affordable housing already exists and there are many other investors who'd likely to have bought that affordable housing asset and continued to manage it as affordable housing, then investing in that isn't creating any impact. If, however, you are turning housing that isn't affordable into affordable housing, or protecting affordable housing that is at risk of not being affordable anymore, then that is clearly creating that additional impact. And then far over on the right-hand side here, you have philanthropy, such as charity, aid and grants. So impact investing is definitely something that growing numbers of investors are becoming interested in. We think it can play a particular role in accelerating that move towards net zero carbon, and also in accelerating a focus on social value for real estate investors. So whilst there's a clear understanding of the role that real estate needs to play from the environmental perspective, tackling that 40% of global carbon emissions that I spoke about earlier, real estate also has a really important role to play in addressing social inequalities and social needs. Investing in the fabric of a community can clearly have a very positive impact, and has the ability to tackle some of these fundamental areas of deprivation that we see highlighted through the UK indices of deprivation. So focusing on provision of health, investment in health facilities, investment in education facilities, investment into affordable housing, investment into real estate that's going to boost local economies and create jobs. And all of this kind of investment can be married up to address some of the sustainable development goals as we've set out here. And there's clearly a direct role that investment in real estate can play, as I said, through either investing directly into socially useful buildings, but also through the improvement of the physical landscape, either directly around buildings or throughout the local area. And that can have a positive knock-on effect on the wider investment into a local area and the sense of pride that people feel in their community. There's also the ability to engage with local communities and with occupiers to ensure that real estate investment is actually meeting occupier and local community needs, and that investment is having a positive impact on the community and not detracting from any community needs. And then finally, there's that knock-on impact of creating economic benefits for the wider community, creating employment opportunities, providing space for local SMEs and small business, other local businesses. And you see here on the right hand side where the share of most deprived local authorities in the UK are, and so an investment strategy that is focusing on tackling some of these areas of social inequality will need to be specifically focusing investment in areas of deprivation, which are predominantly in the northeast and Midlands of the UK. But it's important not to look at these things in isolation. So what does it look like to blend all of these together? And we think this is where the most impact can be had, is by taking all of these different areas and focusing them into one. So looking at mixed use buildings and looking at tackling both the financial, social and environmental in a cohesive manner. So for example, if we take investment into an industrial area, selecting an area in need of investment, an area of deprivation, setting aside certain parts of the asset for affordable rents for social enterprises or training, and also focusing on improving the environmental standards of that building, maybe adding additional renewable energy, for example. Another example might be around taking office spaces and taking redundant buildings, turning them into a combination of office spaces with energy efficient office buildings, and maybe bringing in some retail on the lower floor, which is specifically targeted at meeting the needs of the local community and providing flex office spaces for people who are, as the way we work changes and people are looking for access to space maybe in suburban areas where they weren't in the past. So looking at that combination of the changing needs of local communities and using real estate to really meet those needs. So I'm going to finish there, but just in summary, we see real opportunities for putting environmental and particularly the transition to the low carbon economy at the heart of a real estate investment strategy, and also bringing in a much more heightened focus on the potential social value that real estate can have, and focusing that through an impact investment strategy has the clearest ability to actually meet those local needs and be accountable, and help to account for undertaking that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Abigail. Well, you have a couple of questions. In the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the carbon emissions and which parts had the most influence on that, the carbon footprint. So it was the standing assets, the debt portfolio, and the developments. And which kind of, and of course the corporate side. Where do you see the most opportunity to do a better job? To do some more savings on carbon on the carbon footprint?
I think certainly on development activity, I think there's been quite a lot of progress made over the last few years, looking at what it means to actually operate a building in a really efficient way. Introduce LED lighting, improve the efficiency of the heating, ventilation and cooling, and there's quite a lot of work underway to gradually upgrade the existing building stock to make it more efficient. However, I don't think there's been as much understanding or focus placed on what the embodied carbon in developments actually is, and probably not that many people in the industry understand the actual volume of carbon emissions associated with construction. A typical ground up development will have the carbon emissions equivalent to about 50 years of operation of a building. So it's really important that we tackle that area, and that we as an industry have some clear standards around what the embodied carbon per square metre of space should actually be in a new development, or in a redevelopment. So that's one area. I think the other area I would highlight is in landlords and tenants working together. So as it was probably clear in my presentation, we've made some fantastic progress on improving the efficiency of the areas of building that we have control over. We monitor the energy consumption in those buildings, and are continually looking to check that the work that we're doing is having the desired effect. The ability to do that on areas of buildings which are in tenant control is much more limited. So being able to work effectively with tenants to introduce efficiency measures and to be able to monitor their effectiveness is something that's really important, and is absolutely necessary if we're going to achieve those net zero carbon goals. So those are probably the two areas I'd highlight.
Yeah, and how do you do that? Because the investment strategy that you have as Nuveen, you really need to get all these people involved from the whole industry. That's a huge task, because, well, a lot is there to be done. How do you manage to get all these stakeholders involved and to really create that better built environment and that net zero carbon real estate in the end?
And I think it's really about focusing on this as an opportunity, and I think that's really important. That this it's very easy to look at ESG through the kind of risk management lens, and it clearly is about mitigating risk, but it's also, there's a huge opportunity that we have ahead of us to create the real estate that's going to be fit for purpose in tomorrow's world. So I think there's a huge opportunity for our partners and our suppliers to work with us and to work with the rest of the industry to get there. And as soon as it's seen through that lens of this huge opportunity to create this new real estate, largely through investing and improving the existing building footprint, then everyone's going to wants to work together to get there. So there are opportunities for the property services businesses, there are opportunities for developers, for everybody who works in the real estate sector. So it's about looking at it through that opportunity lens, and then bringing all the right people together, and being collaborative, and working across industry.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Elizabeth, what is your view on this amazing, what Nuveen is doing and their goals that they want to achieve?
I think this is exactly where construction needs to go right now. As she was talking about builders getting more involved, but also the tenants. So I think this is such an exciting and something that's getting a lot of attention right now. I mean, the governments are behind it, people are behind it, builders are behind it. It's really gotten a lot of steam, and I think what she's talking about in that future is very possible. So I'm just really hopeful, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot to be done, but 2030, we will make it.
Hope so.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you with us. Enjoy your day, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.